Good evening, board members and members of the community. This evening, I would like to present my recommendations for our November 2020 school levy. This evening, I want to share first the key questions that the board must consider, share our progress and accomplishments over the past 8 years, our financial context, including our revenue and the impact of the Cleveland Scholarship Program, and our expenditure and the additional impact of COVID-19, and finally, my recommendation to the board and community. As we think about the key questions to consider, we first need to understand that we must ask voters to consider some form of levy in November 2020 because our current levy will expire at the end of this calendar year. The questions we need to answer are first the levy value. Should it be a 15 mil renewal or should we consider any increase in the millage? Second, the duration. Should we consider another limited renewal or make the levy permanent? If it is time limited, for how many years? 4, 8, or 10? What portion should be shared with our community partner schools, our charter partner schools, as we've done with the issue 15 mil levy? And finally, if we select a combination of these factors, should we make one ask of voters or individual asks? The district has made great improvement under the Cleveland Plan. Examples of this include a 72% increase in high-quality pre-K-8 enrollment, preschool enrollment, a 26 percentage point gain or 50% increase in our graduation rates, a 4.4 percentage point increase in K-3 literacy, while simultaneously each of our Ohio 8 urban districts decreased on this measure, a 1.4 percentage point increase on Ohio's third grade reading guarantee, while at the same time, our urban Ohio 8 districts decreased on this measure. A ranking of top 4% of Ohio school districts in growth on the performance index that measures reading and math, and over 90% active parent engagement again last year. Our graduation rate is among the fastest improving statewide. Since 2012, under the Cleveland Plan, our graduation rate has increased 26 percentage points, a 50% increase, up from 52.2% to its current 78.2%, resulting in 2,528 more graduates. Those additional graduates earn $10,000 more than non-high school graduates, which is equivalent to over $25 million annually. This means we've gone from Ohio's lowest performing school district in 2012 to one of Ohio's fastest improving school districts in 2019. And while we've not yet met our ambitious goals for all of our students, this progress can't continue without continued support from our citizens. We also introduced Say Yes to Education in January of 2019. With this community's help, we established a 25-year commitment to college scholarship and wraparound services and supports. We raised over $93 million toward a $125 million goal in private donations to ensure that every student will go to college tuition-free for the next 25 years. That we will also provide core services such as mental health supports, legal clinics, and after-school programs, which were offered in 16 schools last year and will be in 43 schools this fall, with services being deployed in all schools by 2023. Our financial context is driven by our levies. In 2012, Cleveland voters passed a 4-year, 15 mil levy with 57% support. 14 mills directly support the district, while 1 mill is distributed to partner charter schools, of which there are currently 17. This was the first levy passed in 16 years. In 2016, Cleveland voters renewed the 4-year 15 mil levy with 68% support. That's the levy that will expire on December 31st, 2020, unless the board takes action. The 15 mil levy represents $67 million a year, or 12% of the district's net operating budget. A mill is 1/1000th of assessed value, or $1 for every $1,000 that a home is worth. We also have to keep in mind Ohio House Bill 920 that impacts how schools are funded. House Bill 920 was passed in the 1970s and essentially caps school levies at their originally collected amounts. This means that school levies do not keep up with inflation, inflation in this case, which has increased by 12% since 2012. and they do not capture the value of increases in existing property values. This means school districts often need to seek new money on a fairly regular basis to keep up with expenses. Other factors that have influenced our financial health since 2012, our local property tax collections have grown slowly at about 0.8% annually. Our state aid is $31 million higher today. However, payments to charter schools and voucher payments have increased $30.5 million, almost exactly the same amount as the increase of our state aid. Largely, this is driven by changes to the Cleveland Scholarship Program, or our version of Ed Choice, which costs CMSD what used to be $11.9 million a year is now $23.5 million, or 97% increase. Inflation in the last 8 years has increased about 1.7% annually, or 12% in total. And our employees have received cost of living wage adjustments that average just about 1.1% annually, or less than inflation. When we compare to other first-ring districts, you'll notice that Cleveland is near the bottom in our total taxing rate at 79.1, with the highest taxing rate, Shaker Heights, taxing at 189 mils. When we look at the total assessed value per pupil, how much we get per student, we're also near the bottom, compared to, again, Cuyahoga Heights at the very top with nearly $500,000 per pupil. And when we look at how much we spend per child compared to first-ring districts, we're only near the middle at $12,000, despite having the highest childhood poverty in the country. Again, at the top, Shaker Heights and Cuyahoga Heights. When you look at our expenditures over time, the blue shows the levy and local property tax, and you can see has been fairly flat and stable, caused by House Bill 920, which does not allow local tax dollars to grow. The orange is our state aid, and you can see that our state aid has increased, but so has the payout, indicated by the line, showing that most of the increase, with the exception of $500,000, has transferred directly to charter schools and vouchers. It's important to understand Cleveland's scholarship program, which is different than Ed Choice. The Cleveland Scholarship Program was created in 1996 for only Cleveland schools and is available to any family in the city. Its value is for up to $4,650 for K-8 students or $6,000 for high school. And our revenue to the district varies on participation, but only for first-year students. So of the 7,000 plus students who participate in the program, we only get funded for the first 1,600. The others are essentially phantoms, meaning we have unaccounted revenue of $28.5 million that the state does not fund for our program. At the same time, we have a flat $23.5 million deduction, a 97% increase over the last 3 years, regardless of enrollment. Ed Choice is the program created for all other Ohio school districts and has been a matter of some controversy. It is actually only available to low-income families, not to any family, and is zone-based on what are called low-performing or failing schools. While they pay the same amount, the state first pays all students in revenue and then deducts the actual scholarship amount out as opposed to a flat fee. It is not that CMSD is against choice. Families in Cleveland have been making active school choices since the 1970s, and we have continued to support choice for high-quality options. But the Cleveland Scholarship Program is costing Cleveland taxpayers a significant amount more than other urban districts for vouchers that are going to schools with no report cards or no accountability. This chart shows what Cleveland is paying for our voucher program. When you look at the Cleveland line, we are paying 60% of the cost, even though our wealth measure, 82%, shows that we're among the least wealthy districts on this chart. If you pick the closest two next to us at 88% or 80%, you'll see that Toledo is only paying 4% of their costs compared to our 60%. And the school districts that are at 88 and 90% are not paying any costs and would actually be making money. If Cleveland were counted in the same way, we would be paying 8%, not 80%. by generating $35.5 million of revenue and expending $38.7. And this is the problem with the Cleveland Scholarship Program that is costing Cleveland taxpayers a significant amount more than our peers across the state. We have been advocating to fix this, starting with a short-term solution to reduce the fiscal year 2019 back to $17.6 million, and a long-term solution to count all students and not have those 5,000 plus phantom students where we're not generating revenue. Unfortunately, when COVID-19 hit, the short-term solution was no longer an option because of the state's budget crisis. But we will continue to advocate for a permanent solution to count all students in Cleveland's revenue and reduce our costs from the 60% that I indicated to the more reasonable 8% that our peers are paying. In an environment of relatively flat revenue, we have also had to carefully control our costs. There are a number of steps we've done to ensure efficient business and maximizing taxpayer-provided resources. Last fall, the board approved a revised long-term master facility plan, which will result in building or renovating 4 schools, closing 8 buildings, and consolidating 12 programs. We've reduced $20 million in general operating expenses in last year's school budget without impacting our strategy, our schools, our kids, or our classrooms, and had already reduced another $14 million for the coming year before COVID-19 had hit us. We've also controlled healthcare costs, 1.2% increase in fiscal year 19 and fiscal year 20 compared to 6% annually across the nation. And we did this through wellness programs, rebidding contracts, creating low-cost options, and claims audits. And we partnered with a national leader in energy conservation to optimize our energy usage and our utility expenses. And we've adjusted for the financial planning in response to COVID-19. There are a number of funds that are at risk because of COVID-19. First, Governor DeWine announced a reduction in 2019-20 school year budgets of $5.6 million for Cleveland, or 1% of our operating budget, and that has already occurred last June. Yesterday, the state announced an equivalent reduction for the coming year's budget, an additional $5.6 million, or an additional 1%. We know that the state wellness funds are also at risk, and if those were to be reduced, that would be an additional $12.8 million, or a little over 2% of our budget. If we do not renew our levy, that's $67 million, or 12% of our budget. And if we return to recession-level tax delinquencies like we saw in 2008, 9, and 10, we could potentially lose $25 million additional dollars in revenue. All total, that's $116 million, or over 20% of our budget at risk. There are other risks. If the state were to return K-12 funding to the 3-year average, we would estimate an additional $17 million lost. We have received CARES Act funding in the amount of $24 million, but we spent an additional $15 million on unplanned expenses like computers and hotspots and our summer food programs and printing materials to mail home. That, combined with the 2 state budget cuts, more than eliminates the additional revenue from the CARES Act. We do believe there's about $10 million in savings from COVID-19, where we didn't use as much fuel, we didn't have buildings using utilities, we weren't hiring substitute teachers, and estimate that at $10 million. And we do hope and are advocating for future stimulus and stabilization funding for K-12 education. Speaking of advocacy, we have to continue to advocate for the CARES Act allocation. The CARES Act would have allocated to Cleveland $26 million, but only allocated $24 because of guidance released by the U.S. Department of Education that distributes more of these dollars to non-public parochial schools based on their enrollment, not based on the number of children living in poverty. So we must continue to advocate for the appropriate allocation of the CARES Act, which would increase the district funding by about $2.2 million. And we must continue to fight for additional stimulus funding, including funding of up to $200 billion for K-12 schools in urban, suburban, rural, district, charter, and non-public settings that the Council of the Great City Schools, an organization representing large urban districts, has been advocating for since last spring. This is based on estimates that in 2018 through 2020, 2008 through 2010 recession, $110 billion was allocated by Congress. And it is only Congress that can help K-12 schools, cities, municipalities, counties, and states. And so I urge everyone to contact our representatives and senators for the HEROES Act and future stimulus funding. If you look at our current 5-year forecast, you will see that in school year 2021, without a levy renewal, we will be in a deficit of $30.5 million. With the levy renewal, we will have a small positive balance of $2.5 million, but looking into the subsequent school years, we will again find ourselves in a deficit. So our recommendation to the board takes all of this information into account. A levy committee has been formed and has been studying levy options with the goal of presenting this recommendation this evening to the full board. That committee includes representatives from the board, our chair and vice chair, from the district, including me, our chief of staff, and our chief financial officer, the president of the Cleveland Council of Administrators and Supervisors, the president of the Cleveland Teachers Union, representatives from the mayor's office, the president and CEO of the Greater Cleveland Partnership and members of his staff, the CEO of the Cleveland Foundation and his staff, the CEO of the George Gunn Foundation and his staff, and representatives from Breakthrough Charter Schools. What we heard during this process is that we heard and understood the business community's concern about taxing in perpetuity and the duration of a levy that creates accountability. We heard and agreed that the K-12 funding system in Ohio does not work and creates this unfair local burden on both residential and commercial taxpayers. We heard charter school arguments for a significant increase and the concern that the money that levies raise is fixed while the number of students varies, and a number of stakeholders who did not support any additional increases for charter schools. And we heard concern that there could be opposition to the school levy, especially during COVID-19. I want to respond to each of these. While it is true that taxing in perpetuity continuously for permanent taxation is a concern, it is also a concern to have very short taxing windows that put the district and our school community at risk. And so we've tried to balance that with a longer duration in our recommendation. It is true that the K-12 funding system does not work. House Bill 920 that I described earlier was passed when I was 6 years old. In 1994, our funding system was found illegal and unconstitutional in Ohio when I was 24 years old. This week I'll be turning 50 and those things haven't been fixed. So while the system is unfair, we must work within the system we have while we continue to advocate for change. We heard that charter schools are asking for a significant increase because they are not funded in the same way district schools are. And while that's true, it is part also of the charter school bet. The charter schools could do better with less resources. We also heard supporters saying there should be no increase, and yet the Cleveland plan embraced any school district and charter that was seeking quality, and partnership through tax sharing was part of that bet. And we heard that there could be opposition to a school levy, but recognized that doing nothing will result in $67 million of decrease and deep and devastating cuts for our system. So with all of that information, and again, revisiting the key questions that we must ask for a levy this November, with understanding a duration, value, community school share, and number of questions, it is my recommendation to the board that the board consider a 15 mil renewal and a 5 mil increase, of which an additional 1/2 mil would be shared with partnering charter schools. That this would be for the period January 2021 through December 2030, a term of 10 years, and that the board asks this as a single levy question. This recommendation would cost the average homeowner with an average value of just under $50,000, $7 a month. For those of us with homes closer to $100,000, this would be $14 a month. My team and I recognize that this is a very difficult, disruptive time in our community, our state, our country, and our world. Our 15 mil levy will expire at the end of December unless voters renew it in November. If we do nothing, the levy, which is 12% of our budget or $67 million a year, will expire. With the community support over the last 8 years, we've made significant progress, including the growth on Ohio's third grade reading guarantee, improvements in reading and math, and a 26 percentage point gain on graduation rates. And we've done this while carefully controlling expenses and investing as much as possible directly into our classrooms without asking for any new money over the last 8 years. But to continue this progress going forward and to make new investments that will be necessary to respond to the additional educational needs created by COVID-19, I'm now recommending we request an additional 5 mills this November, an approximate increase of $7 per month for the average taxpayer, and that we do so for an extension of 10 years, not permanent, but more stable for our district and our community. I know this is a particularly difficult time to ask for an increase, and we have worked to keep it as small as possible, but believe that our 8-year track record of progress, combined with the new educational needs created by COVID-19, make it necessary. If the board and community were to approve this, you can see that our forecast approves to a positive balance statement for the next 4 years, which has continued to be our commitment to the community. I want to remind the board finally that placing a levy on the ballot is a 2-step process that would start this evening, July 7th, with what's called a resolution of necessity, adopting a resolution declaring it necessary to renew or increase the levy, and requesting the county fiscal officer to certify the total amount of the revenue generated by that levy. And that must be completed no later than July 23rd, although I'm asking the board to do so this evening. Then the board needs to return for a second resolution to proceed, adopting a resolution to submit this renewal or increase of the levy to the electors of the school district on the November 2020 ballot by filing at the Board of Elections no later than August 5th. Thank you for your attention, and I'm now ready to answer your questions and listen to your comments. Thank you.